First Lady Jill Biden or a Dr. Jill Biden? That was a question that was raised by a Wall Street Journal op-ed over the weekend and caused a lot of consternation for a lot of people.
Indeed. Democratic strategist Roger Fisk and culture editor for The Federalist Emily Jashinsky are back with us to discuss. Emily, let me start with you on this one. Let me just put my cards on the table. I thought the op-ed was stupid. I, prefer to call people what they prefer to be called and are comfortable to be called. But I also thought the extreme backlash and over-the-top hyperventilating over it was equally stupid. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so similarly, I had a very visceral reaction to the op-ed, which is that I found it so obnoxious, but I didn't find it obnoxious on ideological grounds. I just found it this was an excuse for the writer to talk about his own interesting life. That was the hook for him to sort of wallow in this self-centric reflection. And so yes. I found it deeply obnoxious for that reason. Yeah. But Dr. Jill Biden is the one of my favorite things about this conversation is that it gives us an opportunity to reflect on Whoopi Goldberg thinking that Dr. Jill Biden should be Surgeon General because she's a great doctor, which is a claim she made, and then was she didn't even know that she was a doctor. So there are actual implications. It also gets to the great Friends quote where Ross and Rachel are in the hospital and he says, "Hi, I'm Dr. Ross Geller." Right. Rachel turns to him and says, "Ross, this is a hospital that actually means something here." The doctor title, it is I do think it is ridiculous that she walks around being addressed as Dr. Joe Biden. I think this particular op-ed made a horrible case for that point. There's nothing wrong with making that point, by the way, either. Some of the over-the-top reaction that Crystal mentioned, it was as though nobody could ever make that criticism. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I know. And I want to preface this by, look, both my parents are PhDs, technical doctor. My mom's actually a PhD in education. So, sorry, Mom, but I agree with you, Emily. I completely agree.
Your mom did deliver you, Sagar.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Fair point.
Here's the thing, Roger, which is that it seemed to me that obviously, look, him calling, what did he say, kiddo?
Kiddo,
I was
yeah.
What are you doing? Anyway, outside of the op-ed, the context, the debate, the reaction to it is doth do protest a little bit too much here. And I truly am trying to get to what the cultural root of the criticism is. It's fetishizing this, the doctor and trying to convey so much seriousness onto some degrees, not all degrees, which are just ridiculous. And again, I'm not saying education is within that field, but just protecting the title seemed to be much more about class signaling than about anything else. What do you think?
Well, fortunately, I went back in their archives and they did the same editorial about Sebastian Gorka a few years ago. So they're protected in that way. Organizations and individuals are very interesting, and obviously that's kind of my motivator in having discussions like this. I used to write remarks and speeches for John Kerry, and I would always tend to be a little bit too leaning towards the rhetorical flourishes, humor, etc. And my office mate, who also then was my first editor, if you will, was more of a stoic kind of Irish Catholic. He was much more conservative than me, and he would bring it down to earth. My point in this is that it's not unusual to me that one person had a stupid idea, which is what this editorial was. It's that people sat around an editorial room, conference room, or an editorial Zoom meeting or whatever, and 8 or 10 or 12 or however many people signed off on this. That's my first point. My second point is how does this merit real estate in a ostensibly serious newspaper while Rome is burning and this diseased lunatic is trying to overturn democracy, and then these people say this is worth 6 or 8 square inches in the Wall Street Journal? It's devaluing themselves.
I don't know.
It's basically opening the window and letting the heat out in the winter from the value of their own brand. I don't get it. And then last to your specific thing, obviously, and maybe this was the whole idea, was clickbait or whatever else.
Yes.
Obviously, this is just throwing a firecracker out into the identity politics stuff, right? It's overtly gender based. My crack, obviously, at the expense of the Gorka at the beginning. But from top to bottom, front to back, it just strikes me as stupid and not worthy of comment in a serious newspaper when there's a couple other things going on.
Sure. But they also, I think that's all fair, Roger. But they also got exactly the reaction that they want. I mean, you had Hillary Clinton tweeting about this. Her name is Dr. Jill Biden. Get used to it. So I also think the response to it is really interesting to dig into because, look, again, what I said, my general approach is I call people what they want to be called. If they have a title they're proud of, if they have one way they want to be referred to, I always try to do that on the show. I always try to do that in life. So I think the op-ed is stupid. But I also think that, again, in the middle of a pandemic, when you have mass unemployment, Great Depression, and stimulus negotiations, and COVID deaths at the worst that they've ever been, that this was the thing that really got people exercised. A very privileged white woman not getting her proper title also says something about the sort of root and base of the Democratic Party at this point, doesn't it, Roger?
Well, first, from here forward, I'd like to be referred to as Maestro. Then, if
no
we're
problem,
willing
Maestro.
Go down that road. No, but I mean, we're to the point culturally, sociologically, where almost the pinnacle of your civic identity is being wronged or being offended. That almost seems to be almost an aspiration on some people's part. So when something like this comes along and people can either directly or peripherally associate themselves with it, and then that feeds into some kind of a I've been wrong narrative, which think, for example, all the folks that gathered on Saturday in Washington, D.C. This is not limited to one side of the aisle. The idea of victimization and being wronged is almost the strongest currency in our national conversation right now across the board. So I do think it's way out of proportion. I agree with you that it probably got the reaction that they wanted to when they set out on it. But I think long term, I don't know that that's going to necessarily get them subscribers. And if I was someone who just relies on it for financial advice and I saw that, I'd be like, all right, that's just one little bit of air that's been let out of the Wall Street Journal brand.
I think they'll be fine, Roger. They've got plenty of corporate recurring subscriptions. What do you make of all this, Emily? Just the cultural aspect to the backlash.
What do you think, kiddo?
Wow. Thanks a lot, Chris. I think this is facile, lean-in, privileged feminism that is masquerading as a righteous cause, and that's something that happens all the time. And it is very telling that it's what set off the Twitterati, because that's what really, really irks them. It's like, it's a completely fair point. Like, this is what upsets the political class is Dr. Jill Biden, because it's a problem that they can relate to. I have no problem with us talking about it. I have no problem with the Journal running an op-ed on the topic, not this one, but an op-ed that's like, hey, you know that guy at your gym who calls himself doctor and he's just an educator? Like, there's an interesting conversation to be had here. It doesn't need to be on the front page, but fine. But like, this is 100% like the privileged political class being up in arms about something that is so out of it's just out of the minds of like most of the people in this country. But they spent all day reeling and like engaging, and like for Hillary Clinton to jump in is also super telling, because Hillary Clinton should realize that this is a Twitter thing, right? Like, what incentive does Hillary Clinton have to weigh in on this?
Well, she's president of them, you know.
Press the political class. It's for the political class. It's just, frankly, it's disgusting.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. She cares more about Dr. Jill Biden than she does stimulus checks, but that's another conversation. All right, guys, thank you for joining us. Really fun.
So great to see you both.
Have a great day.
Guys.
Just when you think 2020 could not get any weirder, the Lincoln Project is now publicly courting AOC, and it's even cringier than you thought. Journalist Ed Jelani is going to break it down when Rising continues.